Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Owen Bennett had always dreamed of a quiet life, far from the chaos of the city. His modest suburban home promised peace, until a simple fence sparked a storm. With a stubborn neighbor like Karen Wilkes, boundaries weren't just physical. Little did Owen know his fight for privacy would turn into a battle for much more. Owen Bennett had always dreamed of a quiet life away from the noise and chaos of city living. After years of dedicating himself to his demanding career as a data analyst, working endless hours to climb the corporate ladder, he finally saved enough to buy his dream home. It wasn't a sprawling mansion, nor was it a sleek, modern condo. Instead, Owen chose a modest yet charming house in the suburbs of Oregon, a two-bedroom property with a spacious backyard nestled at the end of a tranquil cul-de-sac. For Owen, the house represented more than a place to live. It was a personal sanctuary. The backyard, lush and open, was his favorite feature. He imagined peaceful afternoons sipping coffee on the patio, his loyal dog, Rocky, a spirited golden retriever, chasing squirrels in the yard, and the satisfaction of a home office overlooking a small garden he planned to cultivate. The neighborhood seemed ideal at first. Neighbors waved when he passed by, and the street had a friendly, almost idyllic feel. To his left lived the Johnsons, a young couple with two toddlers who often played in their front yard. On his right, there was Mr. Barton, a retired schoolteacher who enjoyed tending to his rose bushes. Directly behind Owen's property, however, stood the imposing two-story home of Karen Wilkes. Owen's brief interactions with her during his move-in week had been polite but stilted. Karen, a sharp-featured woman in her mid-40s with a strict demeanor, exuded an air of control that was hard to miss. Initially, Owen thought little of it. He focused on settling in, spending his days adjusting to remote work and evenings exploring the nearby trails with Rocky. Yet, as he grew accustomed to the house, he began to notice a subtle issue. The lack of a fence around his backyard meant his personal space felt exposed. On several occasions, Rocky had wandered into neighboring yards, prompting polite but firm reminders from Mr. Barton and the Johnsons to keep the dog in check. Moreover, Karen's towering home overlooked Owen's yard, and he couldn't help but feel her gaze whenever he worked outside or tended to the garden. It was as if his every move was under surveillance, an unsettling sensation that began to gnaw at his peace. He started craving a sense of privacy and realized that adding a fence could solve multiple problems at once. It would keep Rocky safely within bounds, provide a barrier from prying eyes, and establish a clear demarcation of his property. Owen approached the matter methodically. He researched local zoning laws, obtained the necessary permits, and hired a surveyor to ensure the fence would fall within his property lines. He even mapped out the project meticulously in his planner, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Confident in his preparations, Owen decided it would be courteous to discuss the plans with his neighbors before beginning construction. The Johnsons were enthusiastic about the idea, mentioning how it might even give them an excuse to install a fence of their own. Mr. Barton, too, expressed his approval, remarking that it might keep his grandchildren from accidentally wandering into Owen's yard. Feeling reassured, Owen knocked on Karen's door to inform her as well. The conversation started amicably enough. Karen listened as Owen outlined his plans, his voice calm and measured as he explained how the fence would improve privacy and safety. However, her expression soured the moment he mentioned construction. A fence? Karen's voice was sharp, her brow furrowing deeply. Why on earth would you want to ruin the open feel of this neighborhood? It's one of the reasons I moved here. Owen attempted to explain that it wasn't his intention to disrupt the neighborhood's aesthetic, but rather to create a sense of personal privacy on his own property. Karen, however, was unmoved. "That's just selfish," she retorted, crossing her arms. "You're not considering how this will affect the rest of us. My view of the woods will be completely blocked. And what about property values? A fence like that will make the area look boxed in and cheap." Her words carried a tone of finality, and despite Owen's best efforts to reassure her, Karen's stance remained unyielding. She made it clear she opposed the idea entirely and expected him to drop it. Owen left the conversation frustrated but resolute. He had gone out of his way to follow every rule and accommodate his neighbors, yet Karen seemed determined to make his life difficult. Still, he didn't want to escalate the situation unnecessarily. Perhaps he thought Karen would come around in time. Little did Owen know, This disagreement over a simple fence was just the beginning of a far more complicated and hostile saga, one that would test his patience, resolve, and ability to stand his ground. Owen thought the initial resistance from Karen would fade with time, but he underestimated her determination. In the days following their conversation, Karen made her displeasure known in subtle yet pointed ways. When Owen worked in his backyard, he would often catch her staring from her second-story window, arms crossed and expression grim. She seemed to take every opportunity to remind him of her disapproval, whether through thinly veiled remarks during brief encounters or loud complaints over the phone while pacing her patio. Despite Karen's hostility, Owen decided to move forward with his plans. The overwhelming support from his other neighbors reassured him he was doing nothing wrong. To avoid further unnecessary confrontations, he decided to offer a compromise. He would let Karen have input on the fence's design. Perhaps, he thought, involving her in the process might ease her frustration. Gathering a few brochures with various fence styles, Owen knocked on Karen's door once again. When she answered, her lips pressed into a thin line, he spoke in his calmest, most conciliatory tone. "Karen, I understand you have concerns about the fence," he began. "I've been thinking about ways to address them, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the design. I want to make sure it blends well with the neighborhood and doesn't disrupt your view too much." For a brief moment, Karen seemed taken aback by his offer. Her expression softened slightly as she flipped through the brochures. Owen even dared to hope she might relent, but as quickly as her demeanor changed, it hardened again. "None of these are acceptable," she declared, tossing the brochures onto her entryway table. "I told you already, I don't want a fence at all. It's unnecessary and it'll ruin everything." "Karen," Owen said, his patience wearing thin, "this is my property. I've followed every regulation and consulted with the neighbors. I've tried to involve you in the process because I don't want bad blood between us, but I can't put this project on hold indefinitely. The fence is going up." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer, her tone sharp as a knife. "Then you'll have to deal with the consequences." With that, she slammed the door in his face. Over the next week, Owen finalized his arrangements with the contractor. The materials were delivered and stacked neatly in his driveway, and a worker arrived to mark the boundaries and prep the yard. Owen decided to store the materials in his garage overnight, suspecting they might be vulnerable to tampering. His suspicions were confirmed the very next morning. When Owen stepped outside, he found the carefully made boundary markings destroyed. Stakes had been yanked from the ground and the paint lines had been erased. The ground, which had been leveled for initial construction, was now uneven and churned with footprints. Though he had no proof, Owen was certain Karen was behind the sabotage. Later that morning, he spotted her jogging past his house. She didn't even glance in his direction, though the smirk on her face was hard to miss. Furious, but determined not to act without evidence, Owen purchased a set of security cameras and installed them around his property. If Karen tried something again, he would catch her in the act. The cameras proved to be a wise investment. A few nights later, as Owen reviewed the footage, he saw Karen sneaking into his yard under the cover of darkness. She crouched low, holding a garden tool, and began removing stakes once more. Owen saved the video and contacted the police to file a report for trespassing and property damage. When the contractor returned the next day, he reassured Owen that the damage wouldn't significantly delay the project. However, the repeated interference began to wear on Owen's nerves. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to back down, and her actions were escalating from verbal confrontations to outright sabotage. Karen, for her part, began to intensify her campaign against the fence. She went door to door in the neighborhood, trying to rally others to her side. She painted Owen as an inconsiderate newcomer who was disrupting the harmony of their community. Most neighbors were uninterested in taking sides, though a few, swayed by her dramatics, signed a petition she planned to submit to the homeowners association. Her campaign extended beyond words. Karen started filing noise complaints against Owen, claiming the construction was disruptive, even on days when no work was taking place. She also left passive-aggressive notes in his mailbox, warning him that the fence would destroy the character of the neighborhood and urging him to reconsider. Through it all, Owen remained focused on the task at hand. He collected every note and recorded every interaction, building a case against Karen's harassment. He wasn't going to let her antics derail his plans, but the constant tension was beginning to take its toll. Even Rocky seemed to sense the stress, sticking closer to Owen whenever Karen was nearby. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Karen stormed onto the property while the contractors were working. She shouted at them to stop, waving her phone and threatening to call the police. The workers, confused and uneasy, paused until Owen came out to intervene. "Karen, you're trespassing," he said firmly. "I've explained this to you multiple times. This is my property, and the fence is being built legally. If you continue to interfere, I'll have no choice but to escalate this." Karen glared at him, her voice rising. "You think you can just do whatever you want because you have a few papers? This is a neighborhood, not your personal kingdom. Mark my words, you'll regret this." For a moment, Owen considered responding, but he knew it would only feed her fire. Instead, he calmly directed the workers to continue, documenting the entire incident on his phone. As Karen retreated, fuming, he couldn't shake the feeling that her next move would be even more extreme. And he was right. The morning was calm, with the sun casting long shadows across Owen's yard as the construction crew resumed work on the fence. The hum of power tools and the rhythmic thud of hammers created a steady soundtrack, underscoring Owen's determination to see the project through. However, the tranquility of the day was short-lived. It started with a sharp knock at his front door. When Owen opened it, Karen stood on his porch, her face a mask of barely contained rage. "I told you this wasn't over," she said, her voice clipped and venomous. "You're making a mistake." Without waiting for an invitation, she marched past him and into his yard, heading straight for the workers. "Stop this immediately," Karen barked at the crew. "You're ruining our neighborhood." The foreman, a burly man with years of experience dealing with difficult clients, looked to Owen for direction. Owen stepped forward, placing himself between Karen and the workers. "Karen, you need to leave. You're trespassing, and this behavior is unacceptable. The fence is legal, and the work will continue." Karen waved her phone dramatically. "I'm calling the police. This whole project is illegal, and I'll have them shut it down." Unfazed, Owen crossed his arms. "Call them. I've already spoken with local law enforcement and provided all the permits. They'll confirm I'm well within my rights." Her bravado faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, shouting into her phone as if to prove a point. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers exited, their expressions weary, as if they'd been through this routine before. Karen launched into her tirade, gesticulating wildly as she accused Owen of violating neighborhood standards, destroying property values, and creating a public nuisance. The officers listened patiently, then turned to Owen. "Do you have your permits, sir?" one of them asked. Owen nodded, retrieving a neatly organized folder from his desk. As the officers reviewed the documents, Karen continued to mutter indignantly under her breath. After a thorough examination, the lead officer returned the papers to Owen and addressed Karen. "Ma'am, everything here checks out. Mr. Bennett is in full compliance with local regulations. This is a civil matter, and there's nothing illegal about his project. We recommend you let him proceed without further interference." Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. "But my view, my property value," she sputtered. The second officer chimed in, his tone firm. "Views aren't protected by law, ma'am. If you have further concerns, you can address them through proper legal channels. For now, we advise you to leave this property." Reluctantly, Karen stormed off, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. As she disappeared into her house, Owen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But the reprieve didn't last long. The very next day, Owen woke to find several planks from the partially constructed fence ripped from their posts. Nearby, a can of spray paint had been discarded, and jagged red letters spelled out "No Fence" on one of the remaining panels. Furious, Owen reviewed his security footage and found exactly what he expected. Karen sneaking onto his property in the dead of night, armed with tools and the can of spray paint. She had torn down part of the fence and vandalized the rest before retreating under the cover of darkness. Armed with this evidence, Owen called the police and filed a formal report for trespassing, vandalism, and property damage. This time, there was no room for Karen to deny her actions. When officers arrived at her home, she tried to feign ignorance, but the footage was irrefutable. As she was handed a citation and escorted back inside, Owen felt a small measure of vindication. Yet even as the workers resumed repairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's retaliation wasn't over. She was the type to double down when cornered, and Owen braced himself for whatever she might try next. For a brief time, things seemed to settle. The police report against Karen and the citations issued for trespassing and vandalism appeared to deter her, and Owen hoped she might finally back off. The fence construction was completed without further interruptions, and Owen could finally enjoy the privacy he had longed for. Rocky, his golden retriever, loved the newfound freedom of roaming the yard without a leash, and Owen relished the ability to work in peace on his patio. But Karen wasn't done. The quiet was only a temporary reprieve, masking her simmering resentment. Behind closed doors, Karen plotted her next move, one far more desperate and vindictive than her previous outbursts. One moonless night, with the neighborhood cloaked in darkness, Karen struck. Dressed in black and wearing a ski mask, she crept across the cul-de-sac and slipped into Owen's yard. Her mission was clear: deface the fence that she despised so much. In one hand, she carried a crowbar. In the other, a bucket of bright red paint. Karen approached the fence, her breath visible in the cold night air. With deliberate force, she used the crowbar to pry loose one of the planks, creating an opening wide enough for her to crawl through. As she climbed through the gap, she muttered angrily under her breath, cursing Owen and his ugly monstrosity of a fence. Once inside, she set the bucket of paint down and opened it, intending to splash the garish red across the smooth wooden planks. But before she could begin, a low growl rumbled through the night. Karen froze. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as she saw Rocky emerge from the shadows, his sharp teeth bared and fur bristling. The golden retriever, normally gentle and friendly, had become a vigilant protector of his territory. "Nice doggy," Karen whispered, her voice shaking. She backed away slowly, but Rocky wasn't about to let her go without consequence. In an instant he lunged, clamping down on her arm. Karen screamed in pain, dropping the crowbar as she struggled to free herself. The commotion woke Owen, who rushed outside with a flashlight. He quickly called Rocky off, and the dog obediently released Karen, standing guard as she clutched her injured arm. "What are you doing here?" Owen demanded, his voice a mix of shock and fury. "You're trespassing again." Karen didn't answer. She scrambled to her feet, stumbled through the hole she had created in the fence, and fled into the night, leaving the bucket of paint and crowbar behind. The next morning, Owen filed another police report. He submitted the footage from his security cameras, which clearly showed Karen breaking into his yard, damaging the fence, and attempting to vandalize it. This time, Owen decided not to hold back. He pressed charges for trespassing, destruction of property, and endangering his safety. Karen, however, was not ready to admit defeat. She filed her own complaint, claiming that Rocky had attacked her unprovoked and that Owen's dog was dangerous. The situation escalated into a legal battle, with both sides presenting their cases in court. Owen's lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, proved instrumental once again. She used the footage to demonstrate that Rocky was acting in defense of Owen's property, and that Karen's injury was a direct result of her illegal actions. Sarah also highlighted Karen's history of harassment, including the prior court ruling against her. The judge sided with Owen. Karen was found guilty of trespassing, vandalism, and attempted defacement of property. She was ordered to pay an even larger sum in damages, covering not only the cost of repairs, but also punitive fines for her repeated offenses. For Karen, the financial blow was devastating. Unable to afford the fines, she was forced to sell her house and leave the neighborhood. The once imposing figure who had terrorized Owen and the community for months departed in silence, her reputation irreparably damaged. As Karen's moving truck disappeared down the street, Owen felt a profound sense of relief. The ordeal had tested his patience and resilience, but justice had prevailed. More importantly, the neighborhood was finally free from Karen's reign of terror. For the first time in months, Owen could enjoy his yard without the shadow of conflict looming over him. The fence stood tall and unblemished, a testament to his persistence and the importance of standing up for his rights. And Rocky, ever the loyal guardian, basked in the sunlight, his tail wagging contentedly. With Karen gone, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of community. Neighbors who had once been wary of Karen's sharp tongue and intrusive nature began to interact more openly, and conversations on the cul-de-sac turned friendlier and more relaxed. Owen noticed the changes immediately. Mr. Barton, the elderly neighbor to his right, stopped by to chat more often, sharing stories from his teaching days and offering tips on maintaining a garden. The Johnsons, whose children had once been the target of Karen's complaints, invited Owen and Rocky to their backyard barbecues, where laughter and the scent of grilling burgers filled the air. The fence itself became a symbol of resilience and progress. Inspired by Owen's efforts, other neighbors began making improvements to their own properties. Mr. Barton installed a small picket fence around his meticulously tended rose garden, and the Johnsons added a deck to their backyard. The street, once overshadowed by Karen's domineering presence, now radiated warmth and camaraderie. For Owen, the victory extended beyond the physical boundaries of his yard. The experience had been exhausting, but it also taught him invaluable lessons about standing firm and protecting his rights. He felt a deep sense of pride every time he stepped into his backyard, whether it was to sip coffee on the patio, play fetch with Rocky, or simply enjoy the peace and privacy he had fought so hard to achieve. As weeks turned into months, the cul-de-sac flourished. Neighbors grew closer, bonding over shared experiences and newfound freedom. The absence of Karen's negativity allowed the community to thrive in ways Owen hadn't anticipated. One evening, while relaxing on his patio with Rocky lying at his feet, Owen reflected on how far things had come. The struggles he endured had ultimately strengthened the neighborhood, turning a once divisive conflict into an opportunity for growth. For the first time since he moved in, Owen felt truly at home. As Owen sat on his patio one quiet evening, the soft golden light of the setting sun bathed his yard in warmth. Rocky dozed contentedly beside him, his tail occasionally wagging in his sleep. The once contentious fence stood tall and strong, blending seamlessly into the landscape, no longer a source of division, but a symbol of triumph and growth. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. From Karen's relentless harassment to the exhausting legal battles, Owen had faced more conflict than he ever anticipated. Yet through it all, he had held his ground, refusing to be bullied out of his rights. The lessons he learned along the way were as lasting as the fence itself. Owen realized that standing up for oneself often involves more than asserting personal boundaries. It can inspire others to do the same. His neighbors had rallied behind him, and the community had emerged stronger and more united. The absence of Karen's overbearing presence allowed for a newfound harmony, and the neighborhood became a place where everyone could feel at ease. Looking back, Owen felt a mix of gratitude and accomplishment. Gratitude for the unwavering support of his neighbors and the steadfast loyalty of his dog, Rocky. Accomplishment for facing adversity with resilience and grace. The fence, once a point of contention, had ultimately brought people together, proving that even conflicts can lead to unexpected opportunities for connection and understanding. As the stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, Owen raised a glass to his journey and to the community that had flourished in its wake. He had not only built a fence, but also forged lasting bonds and strengthened the foundation of his new life. With a smile, he leaned back and let the peace of the evening settle over him. He was home, and that was all he needed.